We've got an NCAA roundup today talking about the top forwards, defensemen, and goaltenders in the NCAA, all coming up on today's episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hattie Kalakash, joined by Sebastian High, and on today's show, we'll be doing an NCAA roundup. We'll talk about Bradly Nadeau, Gavin Brindley, Jack Devine, who's surprisingly having an insane season in the NCAA on forwards. Then we'll talk about defensemen with some great offensive defensemen. We've got Seamus Casey, Lane Hutson, Zeev Buyam, of course, and a lot more to talk about there. And then we'll end things off with the top tier goaltenders. There's a pair of them doing really, really well in the NCAA. And they both showcased at the World Juniors. Trey Augustine ended up playing the most minutes, but we'll also talk about Michael Hrabal, who also had a great World Juniors and is having a decent season over at UMass. But before I get into any of that and any of these NCAA prospects, just want to let you know today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. So let's get started here with the NCAA prospects doing really good at that level. We'll start off with Bradly Nadeau, who was picked in the first round by the Carolina Hurricanes. And I thought if any team's going to pick this guy up in the first round, it's going to be the Carolina Hurricanes, because he's a player who wasn't really high on a lot of radars. He's a bit undersized, and you can see the hesitancy there with drafting out of the BCHL. But you look at his game, and it's just so hard not to love him. And I had him in my first round. I had him closer to 20 than to 30, actually, in my first round in that draft year. And yeah, 26 points in 19 games, 14 goals, 12 assists for the University of Maine, which is a team that when you're scoring on it, you have to carry it. But he's not carrying it alone. He's got a great pair of hands with him there, and his brother, Josh Nadeau, both of them playing really, really well in the NCAA. But let's focus on Bradly for a second. First of all, what made him so special in his draft year? What made us both love him so much?
I mean, I'm a very big fan. I think I had him ranked even higher than you did. Like, he was my big late riser of the 2023 draft class, finishing at 19th on my board. And for me, it was the versatility and just the high-end nature of the entire offensive toolkit. This is a player who had probably a top 2 or 3 shot in the entire draft class in terms of his raw ability and power and lethalness, if that's the word. Very, very good shooter, and was really learning how to use that as a tool to create space for himself in the offensive zone as his draft season progressed. But it was in the BCHL. There's always that caveat that you see with like junior A players that are draft eligibles. But he was just so versatile. It was the high-end intelligence that at the beginning of his draft year, he was kind of touted as like a two-way center, right? Like smart, but like not perhaps the flashiest. And then the flashiness just dominated the rest of the season. And he has not looked back since at all. He is a really, really dynamic player. He uses every tool he has in every situation he's in. He's really good at layering his tools on top of one another to really get the most out of them. And that makes him quite special. He's a really smart playmaker, but he uses his handling to create space for himself, whether it be in a playmaking position or a goal scoring position. Very deceptive. Defenders have a really difficult time reading whether he wants to shoot or pass the puck, or if he wants to just hold on to it. He's very good at delaying in possession when he has that extra beat of time to use that to wait for space to open up, which is a habit that players usually only learn like when they're like 22, 23, 24 years old. So a lot of really impressive things going on in Nadeau's game, and the transition to the NCAA has been really, really smooth, and the production's just been off the charts, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And it's so hard to translate from the BCHL to the NCAA seamlessly. You have to be a really, really good player. But it's so funny to me that I remember like in like March, like February, March of last year, I was talking to you and being like, dude, Bradly Nadeau's really good. And you were like, I don't know. But then by the end of the year, you
I hadn't
outranked.
watched him since December, and
Yeah.
so that was my issue.
Yeah, and I was like banging that drum, being like, dude, you have to watch this kid right now. Like, he's so good. And yeah, you were kind of hesitant, and by the end of the year, you outranked me on him. I had him, I think, 22nd or 23rd, something like that.
19th.
You had him at 19th, and that's a
Yep,
great
top
choice.
20.
Honestly, he's a fantastic. Just the decision making on him is so solid. When he
Yeah.
shoots, he's never overlooking other options. It's the right shot to take every time. And when we say he had a top 2 or 3 shot in the draft, we're talking about a draft with Connor Bedard, Adam Fantilli, and like there's a lot of
Michkov.
yeah, like
Maybe top 3. I don't think he outranks Michkov or Bedard there, but like
I don't know.
if it's in contention with guys like Matt Wood, I'd probably take Nadeau's shot over him. Like there were some really high-end shooters in this class, like Ryan Leonard, but Nadeau has the combination of the quickness of his release. He does not need much space at all to get it off.
Yeah.
And the habits to always be in goal scoring positions, which is just so important for goal scoring.
Absolutely, 100%. But moving on to Gavin Brindley, who's been having a really, really good season as well. Brindley has been lights out. Personally, I've loved everything I've watched from him. He does have 22 points in 19 games. It's not the highest point per game rate, but he's got 14 goals in that span. And that's been really impressive to me because we saw a lot more playmaking and two-way play in his draft year. And now he's showcasing his ability to just put pucks in the back of the net consistently. And yeah, he's been money on the power play. And I knew it was just a matter of time before Brindley became a top line forward for the University of Michigan. And him and Frank Nazar have been playing fantastically together. We saw them at the World Juniors and what they can do together at the World Juniors. It was so clear that this player was going to be doing really, really well. And yeah, overall, just a great, great season from Brindley, who continues to have fantastic defensive impact, to be a really good forechecker, to be a really good back checker, always in the right positions, using his skating really well. He's just got such a massive skill set, and it was one of the main reasons why I had him in my top 15 in that draft year. Is he has all those tools and can use them really well, and was doing it really well at the NCAA level already last year. And we've seen what a year of progression can do. And on top of that, he's showcasing a new area of his game that wasn't as prominent in this draft year. So that's another tool in his arsenal that he can pull out and use. So overall, really, really impressed. On top of that, we need to talk about the top goal scorer in the NCAA. Jack Devine has 17 goals in 21 games for 32 points with the University of Denver. And every time I've watched Steve Buyam, I've come out even more impressed with Jack Devine. The many different ways he finds to put pucks in the back of the net. Insanity. He's just so fun to watch. And yeah, just such a versatile offensive toolkit. And he's the type of player who doesn't only just kind of shoot from the half wall. He scores a lot of what we call garbage goals, and does it extremely well. So yeah, overall, I think Jack Devine is bound for a future. And there's a reason I had him in my 3rd round, and there's a reason I was so absolutely shocked when he slipped all the way to the 7th round of the 2022 NHL draft. So yeah, just overall greatly impressed. But I want us to talk about Gabe Perreault a bit, because so far he's been looking like the best player out of the trio of Perreault and Smith and him, right?
He has, which is just so impressive because Will Smith and Ryan Leonard are playing some really good hockey there with Boston College, but Gabe Perreault has really taken strides in his game over the course of the last year. Like, he was another one of like the late risers on my board personally, where I kind of had like a 2 weeks like segment at the end of the draft class right before I released my rankings, where I had a couple player names jotted down of like players that I've watched a lot but just didn't quite have a firm grasp on in terms of what I actually believe that they can become at the NHL level. And Bradly Nadeau was one of those, but Gabe Perreault was one of the other big ones. And I think I watched like 7 games of his in the last couple of weeks of the draft cycle, and he rocketed up my board like 10 to 15 slots. I was at the end really, really impressed by just how game breaking the intelligence and the off puck movement and the handling really are. The playmaking game, of course, as well. But he's so fascinating because like he's a player that I've always had quite a few doubts about in terms of the likelihood that he's able to keep progressing against high levels of competition, because it's all brains. Like, what makes Gabe Perreault special is it's entirely his brains. The handling skill is really good as well, for sure. But beyond that, the tools do not jump off the page at all. But he is more than just hung with his line mates. He is driving play at the NCAA level for them.
Yeah.
And I think with every passing day in a redraft, he'd go a slot or two higher. So he's progressing very nicely, and Rangers fans should be really excited for this player.
Absolutely, they really should be. But that wraps things up for a breakdown of the forwards of this NCAA roundup. We'll talk about some top defensemen in the NCAA. We'll talk about Lane Hutson, Seamus Casey, Zeev Buyum, and Artyom Levshunov coming up after these messages from our sponsors over at FanDuel.
The NFL season is wrapping up, but there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets, guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose, that you can spend on anything, ranging from spreads to player props to over and unders and far more. Whether you want to bet on your favorite NFL team to win the Super Bowl or your favorite quarterback to throw for 3 or 4 touchdowns in the next game, the choice is yours. I personally like to use FanDuel for same-game parlays to make the games that I personally attend all the more exciting to get really close to the action. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL.
Alrighty, so moving on to the defensemen, we'll talk about the blue line prospects that have been doing really well in the NCAA. And I think we can start with the top scorer overall in terms of total points in the NCAA, and that's Seamus Casey. He had a good but not overwhelming tournament at the World Juniors. I thought he used his playmaking really well, and that's really what stands out massively with Casey. It's just he constantly makes really good decisions when distributing the puck, whether that's at the blue line, deep in the offensive zone when he activates, or especially on the breakout. He's the type of player who consistently manipulates. And I think that New Jersey Devils have a really good prospect here on defense who can potentially, play on their top power play, but it's going to be difficult to outrank Luke Hughes, right?
Yeah, I mean, Luke Hughes and Simon Nemeth, they've got two very, very highly drafted and very skilled defensemen.
Yeah.
Hughes definitely has the higher offensive ceiling between those two, but I wouldn't be shocked if Nemeth took over like a second power play either, because at the very least, he has a bomb of a shot, and he's a really solid distributor. Not the flashiest power play defenseman, but would do a very decent job at it.
Yeah.
So Casey's going to have some competition, but Casey does a lot of his value comes on the man advantage. It comes when he is able to have the puck on a stick with space and time. Yeah. And I think that if New Jersey wants to maximize his potential and his development, giving him power play minutes is pretty important to do that. But he's been playing some excellent hockey at Michigan. I've been a pretty big fan of this player going back to the beginning of his draft year. I remember him being like inside my top 10 when that draft year started. And while Lane Hutson ended up beating me out on my draft board in the rankings, Casey wasn't far behind. I think I had him ranked like 16th or 17th in that year as well. So yeah, the fact that New Jersey was able to snap him up in that mid to late second round was some excellent value there as well. But yeah, Casey's a ton of fun, and I really liked his World Junior Championships this season. I thought that, especially in the group stage, that he's shown brightest among USA defensemen. I thought he played some better hockey in that group stage than Lane Hutson or Zeev Buyum did, and he was the most confident of the bunch in those games. But when the elimination game started, you really saw the two other players come to bat, and Casey was playing good hockey in the elimination games, but he wasn't leaned on as heavily to be like the offensive guy when Team USA needed it.
Absolutely, for sure. But speaking of Lane Hutson, he is the top point scorer in terms of points per game in the NCAA with 23 points. Yeah, for defensemen, of course. 23 points in 16 games. He's got 9 goals and 14 assists. And again, Lane Hutson we all know what kind of player he is at this point. We've seen him at the World Juniors. We've seen him at the NCAA level. We've been talking about him constantly, and for good reason. He's a fantastic prospect. On the puck, there are things he does that probably only Cale Makar can do in this world. Like just the shiftiness.
Quinn Hughes can do anything that Lane Hutson can.
Quinn Hughes is a lot more of, he uses his skating a lot more conservatively and effectively. I'm talking about
a far better skater. Yes.
Yeah. I'm talking about the weight shifts. I'm talking about the ability to wriggle out of pressure the way he does, the back and forth moves where he just sends a player. Yeah.
The elite shoulder fake. Yeah.
Those are the things I'm talking about. Yeah, like the ability to just wriggle his way out of pressure consistently and just send players for a cup of coffee completely from that blue line. Lane Hutson has that ability that is just uncanny. He reads opponents' feet so well. that he almost never gets checked at that blue line. And
No.
when he does, he's actually gotten so much better at playing under physical pressure, at handling a player on his back, at pushing against players who are kind of draping themselves over him as he's trying to retrieve a puck. Like, the physical elements of his game have actually improved so much. But the main and consistent issue is rush defending, and it's because the main and consistent issue with this tool is his pivots, right? Like, that hasn't changed.
That hasn't changed, but his projection remains very good nonetheless. I think
Yeah.
that we're going to see the impact of the pivots, especially when he makes the jump to professional hockey. Like if he starts playing some games in the AHL, which is probably where he starts, the first like 3 games at least that he plays professionally will probably be in Laval.
Actually,
Oh,
Kent Hughes has come out and said that he's excited to have Lane Hutson join the organization and this season. And usually when that happens, we see players get a couple games. Like we saw it with Sean Farrell last year. Sean Farrell's a full-time
certainly.
AHLer this year, but he played like
Yes.
6 games at the end of the year last season with the
Well, the
Canadians.
Habs had about like 8 healthy players by the end of the last season.
Yes, but also if you look at this defense core, I mean,
Lucas Condado was playing NHL minutes last season.
yeah, that's rough. That is a fact, and that is very, very rough. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a solid chance we see Lane Hutson get a cup of coffee in the NHL. That's
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Certainly. But I think when he does make that jump to professional hockey, we're going to see just how much he's exploited by the quick, intelligent, skilled wingers of the NHL and the AHL. Because you see a lot of those in the AHL as well, the ones that need that extra bit of time that you don't really have in the NHL. That will be difficult to defend against, especially for a player like Lane Hutson, whose pivots are weak and whose backward skating is a weakness. That is still an area of improvement, but we'll see just how often he gets burned on that, because right now he's kind of like perfected the craft in the NCAA of like limiting that issue, where he kind of just gives up the outside, keeps the inside, and then suffocates play when it's already deep in the defensive zone instead. He's adapted, but whether that system is actually going to work against NHL players remains to be seen. But either way, this is a player who, yes, has a couple imperfections in his game, certainly, but who's just grown leaps and bounds in his on-puck game since the draft year, which is just unfair. Like the fact that he's already one of the better players on puck in that 2022 draft class, and that has, like, as you really detailed in his play on the blue line, I think is where that shines brightest, right? His ability to not get checked, and when he is checked, kind of like bounce off of it instead of being like smothered by it. And he's still a fascinating prospect, one of my favorite players to watch in the world still. Lane Hutson's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're an undersized defenseman and you want to learn more about what to do in those situations, just watch Lane Hutson. There's one key rule of thumb with Lane Hutson whenever he gets the puck and is pressured physically is free up my stick at all costs, and that's the right thing to do in that situation. But moving on to 2 draft eligibles, we'll start with Steve Bouillon and go real quick because I feel like we talk about him every single show. Steve Bouillon has a great point record so far. He's the second highest point scorer among defensemen in the NCAA with 25 points in 19 games. He's got 5 goals. Kinda, for draft eligible, for sure. Overall, I mean, he's just doing really, really good with the University of Denver. Another player is he's so wriggly. Like, I talk about this all the time. I feel like he's covered in butter. Like, he's just constantly just weaving through pressure effortlessly. His forehand, backhand moves from the blue line, the way he shifts defensemen, and not defensemen, the way he shifts forecheckers is really, really ridiculous. And breakout game's fantastic, and he's been so clutch for Denver. But I really want to talk about Artyom Levshunov as well, because he's doing well. His numbers are really, really good. He's got 20 points in 21 games. He's under a point per game, but overall, for Michigan State, he's been the most reliable player on the power play for them. He's constantly been thrown out there for power play missions and has been doing really, really well from that blue line. He's the type of player who will consistently get points just by having a fantastic shot. Like, he'll rifle it from the blue line and you're scared for the goaltender. Like, he's got a really good shot. He's still working on placing it well, but I like the way he times a shot. I like the way he uses a shot as an option to get a tip in, to get a rebound, mainly because he times his shot with flyby tip attempts really, really good. You know, when his forwards are flying by the high slot or the low slot, he times a shot really well to get it through with a screen or with a tip or that kind of stuff. So that's been one part of his game I've really grown to like. But overall, I think the decision making, especially on the breakout, especially defensively, does need some work. Which is why Yeah, especially under pressure. Like that's why I was so surprised with seeing him at second overall in the North American scouting list, as we discussed in our last episode. You should check that out. We had a lot of hot takes on that as well. But yeah, I think Levshunov has some ways to go, but the tools are so impressive that I can understand a team being high on him, picking him in the top 3, top 4, top 5. I wouldn't go for it, but I understand why teams are high on him.
For sure.
So, absolutely. So that wraps things up for our second segment and our breakdown of the defensemen doing really well in the NCAA. Now we'll talk about a trio of goaltenders that have been doing really well in the NCAA as well. We'll talk about Jacob Fowler, Trey Augustine, and Michael Hrabal coming up after these messages from our sponsors over at Gametime. If you like buying tickets last minute for any event, Gametime has you covered. Whether that's sports or theater or comedy or whatever requires tickets, Gametime is a great place to get them last minutes. Myself personally, I'm a person who has a very rotating schedule. I never know when I'll have an afternoon free. So having Gametime available to kind of buy tickets last minute and get into an event up until the last minute before it, and even sometimes an hour after it starts, is really, really useful. They've got a bunch of deals as well. They're obsessed with saving you money. My favorite is zone deals. Basically, you choose a section, and Gametime picks the seats. And that gives you an average of about 18% of savings. And the Gametime guarantee means that you'll always get the best price. So if you find a ticket in the same row and section for less than what Gametime has to offer, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, but again, it's really simple. Just create an account, you redeem the code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON, for $20 off your first purchase. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Alrighty, so let's close things off with a discussion on the goaltenders from this draft class and from the NCAA overall. I mean, there are 3 standout drafted goaltenders that are doing really well in the NCAA right now. And I think we can start with Jacob Fowler, who's got the best numbers of them all. He's got a .927 save percentage and a 2.09 goals against average as a freshman, and he has a 14-3-1 record. I know it's Boston College. I know they've got a fantastic offensive team, but defensively in front of him, not much that really makes you go, wow, okay, he's really well surrounded in terms of defensive impact. And he's still putting up fantastic numbers. And beyond that, he's just so reliable, so clutch in net. And if he lets in a bad goal, it doesn't shake him. You know, a lot of goaltenders will let in a bad goal, and you can see them kind of feel deflated. You can see them struggle on easy shots after that. Jacob Fowler will make like 8-10 bell saves after letting in a point shot. Like he's motivated. It motivates him to do better, which is so very good for a goaltender, right? And yeah, having him be I think it was like the 6th or 7th goaltender drafted in the 2023 NHL draft, something like that. And having him be the best of the bunch so far in the NCAA, like, how do you think that feels for a player like this?
Pretty good, I would assume. Jacob Fowler has been excellent, right? Like I think, as you said, Boston College's defensive core is not nearly as strong as their offensive core is, which I think by virtue makes Jacob Fowler's job a little bit more important than the average NCAA starting goaltender. But I do think that Trey Augustine's been playing a bit better hockey so far this season. That may be a slight hot take, but he's not as well surrounded. Like the fact, yes, he has Artyom Levshunov on his team. He's playing some really good offensive hockey, but
Max
the defensive
Sherbak
are,
and
yeah. Like there's some decent defensemen there, certainly.
Mm-hmm.
I've been more impressed with Augustine on a game-to-game basis this season than I have with Fowler, but it's still tight. These are two goaltenders. They're my top 2 goaltenders ranked last season. They would still be my top 2 goaltenders ranked this season. I'd still probably go Augustine over Fowler. I mean, we just got a small sample at the World Junior Championship where Augustine was the best goaltender at that tournament, including Jacob Fowler, who was his competition in net there. And while Fowler played some decent games for the States, certainly, like he played decent hockey, Trey Augustine was stealing, or not stealing games, but he was stealing goals at the very least. He was stealing back goals on a consistent basis, whereas Fowler was doing well rather than spectacularly.
Yeah.
And of course, very small sample. Fowler only played 2 games at that World Juniors, and it was on short notice when Augustine was out with illness, so on and so forth. But these are 2 very, very high-end goaltenders, and I'm very curious to kind of see how this comparison continues to develop over the years, because they are currently, in my mind, 2 of the best goaltenders in the NCAA, bar none, let alone like recently drafted ones. Yeah. And I think that head-to-head is going to continue being a topic for quite a while. But how do you feel about like comparing those two? Would you side more with Jacob Fowler now? I know during our draft rankings, we were both in agreement that Augustine was like the goaltender of that draft class.
I'm still torn, mainly because Fowler, I was really high on him about midway through the draft season. I'd seen some things from him that really made me impressed. And overall, with Fowler, you're getting a goaltender who consistently wins. Like he always finds a way to win a game. Like you can't. It's hard to compare the two because they're so stylistically different. Like Augustine is a lot more technical, a lot more composed, a lot more energetic in net, whereas Fowler has this kind of calming element to his game that I feel like if with the right team, I feel like Fowler overall would become the better prospect, would become the better goaltender overall. But Augustine has such a reliable, dependable style, and it's just so clutch in every situation. We saw it at the World Juniors. He was making big saves at big moments, whereas Fowler wasn't really doing that. I think Augustine's a bit ahead of Fowler in terms of his overall development curve. I feel like Fowler has a lot more to add. Which is ridiculous given how much Fowler's already won in his career, in his short career. But yeah, I feel like I don't know. I'm leaning Fowler, mainly because I like that style. I really, really do. I like the composed, calm, deflect pucks to corners and just overall be a leader without having, without even being allowed to have a letter on your jersey type thing from goaltenders. And yeah, just overall. I love both of them, but I feel like Jacob Fowler overall just brings an element of composure and calmness to a team that you can't really teach. And yeah, there's a reason why he's been so successful. Whereas Augustine has been playing with the NTDP. Now he's playing for a Michigan State team that has better defensemen than Boston College, honestly. Like they have a better group of defensemen, I feel. A lot of seniors and a couple of really good prospects in Levshunov and Sterbach. Whereas Boston College, not as much. And yeah, in NCAA play, for sure, for me, Jacob Fowler clears, like 100%. But what we saw at the World Juniors was a Trey Augustine that's really good in tournaments, and I think that can be a separating factor. But regardless, they're both really, really good prospects. I just personally can't get past my love for Jacob Fowler's style. But we do need to talk about Michael Hrabal, because even though his numbers haven't been up to par, Michael Hrabal has been really, really good for UMass if you watch the games. Like he has saved them on a couple of occasions, and a lot of the goals he lets in are just plays he has no chance on. And yeah, he has a 906 save percentage and a 2.7 goals against average in 13 games for UMass with an 8-3-1 record. So it's not like he's losing games, not like he's having an average record. That's a really, really good record for a goaltender. Hrabal at the World Juniors, though. Talk me through what you saw and what you liked.
Yeah, it was a fascinating tournament for Hrabal. It was bookended by his two poorest performances of the tournament, but everything in between was really solid. Like apart from that 6-2 loss to Slovakia and that very early game where he got pulled in the bronze medal game, he was playing some pretty good hockey. I was liking his level of composure in those like middle games of the tournament. I thought that I saw a far more composed Hrabal than I'd seen at any point last season in his draft year.
Oh, for sure.
Composure's always been an issue for him, and he seemed to settle into a groove. But there's definitely still an erratic nature to his game that he has yet to shake, and we saw that at the World Juniors as well, right? Like when the floodgates opened against Slovakia, they fully opened. When he had a rough start to a game in that bronze medal game, it was a rough start to a game. When it's like the defensemen of the world who rarely make mistakes, but when they do, they're massive.
It's the worst you've ever seen. Yeah, I'm thinking of Artyom Levshunov. Yeah, absolutely,
and definitely along those lines with Hrabal, but he is so toolsy. He is so huge. There's definitely a world where he ends up being the best goaltender coming out of that 2023 draft class. I just don't think the likelihood is all that high that he surpasses the other two best goaltenders of that draft class, who are also playing in the NCAA right now, who we just talked about. So all the top goaltenders of that 2023 class are kind of put together in this segment because they're all NCAAers, and it fits them nicely.
Absolutely, and Adam Gayon shouldn't be far behind that as
Oh
well.
my God, of
We'll see him
course.
fairly soon. It's going to be a great time. But that wraps things up for our NCAA roundup. Thank you very much for watching. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next. And thank you for listening. If you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day if you can, and leave us a review if you can as well. For your second listen of the day, make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today. They're a 24/7 news channel about sports that we got going on YouTube. You can check that out anytime, and they'll update you on what's going on in sports. And make sure to tune in for our next episode as we continue our draft coverage and our prospects coverage overall for this year. This has been Hadi Kalakash with Sebastian High, and we hope you tune in next time.